Charles Vidic. I'm Charles Vidic. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Western Connecticut Council of Governments. And Tucker, you might introduce yourself too. And
Hey everyone, I'm Tucker Beckett. I'm the senior planner at WestCog.
then I guess if we could ask each of the participants just to introduce themselves, that'll help us to better dialogue with you on the points of this presentation. So
Yeah.
whoever would
Going,
like to go first.
yeah, going in order. Let's start with John.
John Moran, Chairman of the New Fairfield Zoning.
Okay.
Thank you. Zoom user. Whoever signed in as
Anybody?
a Zoom user.
That can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could be me. That could be me, Gus Christensen from Weston Planning and Zoning. I'm sorry. I'm doing this on my phone. In a minute, I'm going to move over to my computer if I can, and then you might see my proper name. I don't think my camera's working on my phone either. But yes, it's Gus Christensen, Weston Planning and Zoning.
No worries. Thank you for being here. Sally.
Yes, Sally Korsh, Chair, Weston Planning and Zoning.
Okay. And then Pat, I guess.
Pat LaRoe, Town of Greenwich, Director of Planning and Zoning.
Great to have you with us.
Say it again. I missed that. Say it again.
Sure. Pat LaRoe, Town of Greenwich, Director of Planning and Zoning.
Okay, great. And let's see. Do we have one more person here?
Yeah, Margarita.
Hi.
Sorry, we're just going around doing introductions.
Oh, okay. Hi. It's Margarita Alban, Chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission in Greenwich.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for being here tonight. We got a great presentation planned for you.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do is we'll begin. Let me just see if we can all see the slides here. Yes, can you all see that beginning slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, as I mentioned, my name is Charles Vidic, and I'm the Senior Project Manager at the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tucker Beckett, who's the Senior Planner at WestCog. Today, we will review the land uses that require a special permit and how they are regulated by municipalities in Connecticut. This training course reviews the range of special permits, land uses that exist in Connecticut, common applications of the special permit procedure, legislative and case law authority for its use, and its strengths and weaknesses compared to other development procedures. The goal of this presentation is to familiarize you with the legal requirements for special permits and innovative applications for its use. We will discuss how special permit use is managed through a wide range of concerns that are dealt with, including transportation, economic development, environmental impacts. As a Planning and Zoning Commission member or member of a Zoning Board of Appeals, you're required to undertake, and to understand really special permits and how they're regulated and the legal responsibilities that apply to their use and their decision making. So this 1 hour training fulfills your requirements of getting at least 4 hours of training during your term of office, or if your term is longer than 4 years, for the term that you have been assigned. And this is, as you probably know, for both planning and zoning commissions as well as zoning boards of appeal. I should say that the work we're going to talk about today represents a statewide analysis of special permit regulations, which has never been done before. This is the first time you'll ever hear about this. So we're not just going to talk about the legal issues, but we'll talk about current practice, which is often a driver for case law in Connecticut. So moving right on to our agenda, we've talked about it a little bit here, but we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the special permit, and we're also going to talk about definitions that apply to the special permit, and also what a special permit is versus a special exception. we will be going into other tools that relate to special permits, such as site plans, overlay zones, and zone changes, because often these other tools are interrelated with a special permit. And of course, we're going to go into the reasons for the approvals and denials and how those should be dealt with in terms of decision making. So this course also addresses special permit administration, the procedures, and their use with non-conforming uses in Connecticut. That's going to be a special discussion towards the end here because there's Public Act that was passed in 2018 that deals with that particular issue. So let's just go into the special permit history. I don't know if you can see this, but this represents kind of a long view of what's happened in Connecticut with special permits and related laws. Zoning was established in 1925, even though there were towns that actually had it earlier, but as a statewide authority to zone, it started in 1925. That's not on this map here, this little diagram, but it's important to understand that background. But it was not until 1959 that the special permit concept was allowed in Connecticut. So the reason that's important is that we were dealing with a whole range of different types of uses that were not being dealt with zoning or even a conditional zoning concept prior to 1959. We've had a variety of other zoning concepts that have come in to Connecticut. The National Flood Insurance Program came in 1968, creating the floodplain zone concept. In 1969, the Connecticut Supreme Court upheld the use of floating zones in the case involving Stanford. And of course, that was memorialized again in 2021 through Public Act 2129. Then in 1985, the legislature enabled the use of special use and overlay zones to expand its use beyond the limited application of the Coastal Zone Management Program. And then 9 years later, incentive housing overlay zones were added to the list of special development techniques. In 2007, the legislature authorized appeals of special permits decisions of the Connecticut Supreme Court. And then in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court, the Connecticut Supreme Court put guardrails on some special development practices in the McKenzie decision, which ensures the principles of uniformity, which are otherwise known as the Equal Protection Act, to be sure that they were complied with. And in 2021, the legislature extended the deadline for special permit approvals that had not yet expired. We'll go into more detail on a number of these important laws during this training session. And of course, in 1977, the legislature required that the special permits be placed on the land records. It's also the same year that site plans were established as a tool for zoning, and basically a tool that is often highly correlated with special permits, and that's why it's important. So let's just take a quick tour through history here, starting with the zoning permit back in 1925, then really the conditional zoning permit, which is just an evolution of the zoning permit tied to different types of similar uses. 1959, we've already mentioned, is where the special permit came in. 1977, the site plan, and then followed by plan developments, village districts, overlay zones, and even floating zones. And of course, the floating zone was basically started back in Stanford, but of course, memorialized in 2021. So we have a whole range of tools, and many of the ones that you see in this diagram, not all of them, are related to the special permit in one way or another. So let's just go into the special permit authority. Make sure, I just want to make sure we didn't skip one there. Yes, we did. I thought we did. The definition of special permits is taken here from the Suffield zoning regulations. Not all municipalities have established a definition for a special permit. And you can see what the definition in Suffield is: use is determined to require restrictions or conditions which, if controlled as to number, area, location, or relation to the neighborhood, would promote public health, safety, and general welfare, provided appropriate size and scale, parking and loading, and suitable transportation conditions exist without adverse impacts to environmental conservation or historic preservation resources. Of course, this is just one example. As you'll hear from this presentation today, there are many other considerations than the ones in this particular municipality. But it's important. One of the definitions that we have here is an indication of what every municipality should have. If there isn't a definition of special permit, there's a question of what a special permit can do. And that becomes more important in the field of litigation. So let's talk about the special permit versus uniformity rule. For those who are not familiar with the McKenzie decision of 2013, it basically upholds uniform standards within each district, and commissions can't vary setbacks, height, et cetera, within a district. Now, this is not really a very monumental decision in one sense. This is already a requirement of Section 8-1, Section 8-2 of the General Statutes on Zoning. However, what's different here is that this issue was never raised within the context of special permit applications. And so one of the reasons why this is very important is because a special permit cannot be less restrictive than the underlying zone. However, it can be more restrictive than the underlying zone, and that has been held up as valid in the McKenzie decision, as well as one other decision that we'll talk about. And so there are some regulations that we've seen that don't understand that distinction. In other words, you can only vary them to be more restrictive, not less restrictive, because it is a unique animal, the special permit, in which it has difficulty, in terms of what we're dealing here with the compatibility of a special permit, because inherently they were not compatible before 1959. And so to make them compatible requires a series of conditions that will make that so. Of course, the argument is also you could have done a zone change. However, the decision that came out of the 1959 legislation was these things would be making zone changes out of individual buildings. And so that's why we have special permits today. So we've talked a little bit about the special exception uniformity rule. So the way a special permit use can be made compatible with the zone in which it is located requires extensive understanding of the potential land use impacts of any given proposal. This is not always easy. Some of the techniques used include placing conditions on the size, location, operating hours, landscaping, traffic, environmental, and public health impacts of the proposed use. And you'll hear later from Tucker a whole range of others since we've looked across the entire state on this issue. The special permit concept has revolutionized the use of zoning. Prior to its creation, as we mentioned in 1959, zoning commissions could either permit or prohibit development proposals. This approach left much to be desired in a world where thousands of different land uses exist, all within different traffic and environmental impacts and economic impacts. So it's an invaluable tool, but it also has restrictions that have been put on it by case law. So I want to just take an example here, and some of you may actually recognize it, even though I have not indicated where it's from. But if you look at this particular regulation, the word modification is highlighted. But let me just read this first sentence. If you're taking this as a possible compliance or lack thereof to the McKenzie decision, you have for congregate housing, the commission may authorize a special permit pursuant to section XXX of these regulations for the modification of the maximum floor area ratio density coverage, height, number of stories, setbacks, and parking, provided the commission finds said modifications further the purpose of Y of these regulations. So what are the concerns raised by this regulatory text? Does it potentially violate the Supreme Court McKenzie rule? So what I'd say is, on its face, the regulation we are looking at implies that setback standards can be reduced. If that should mean shortened or eliminated, there would be a conflict with the uniformity rule. However, if the word modification is interpreted as increasing the setback or reducing the lot coverage, this would be consistent with McKenzie decision. So the lesson from this example is that a choice of words matter, especially if a commission is not fully cognizant of what the McKenzie decision allows, and likewise a developer as well. So let's go on to the special permit administration. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm sure many of you are, but perhaps not all of you. Many are often confused by the wide range of terminology used by the 167 municipalities with zoning. Terms such as special permit, special exception, special case permits are all synonymous. The most common term is special permit, which is used by 119 municipalities in Connecticut, and 44 use special exception. In addition, there are a handful of municipalities such as Danbury that use the special exception, special permit terms, but do so by delegating special permit reviews to the zoning commission and special exception reviews to the planning commission. The administration of special permit or special exceptions can be delegated to either the planning or zoning commission, the combined planning and zoning commission, or the zoning board of appeals. And across Connecticut, all of these scenarios exist. So there's often confusion, not necessarily for commission members that have been around for a while, but for those who are new to it, these terms can be very confusing, especially since very few actually go to the point of explaining this in their regulations, except in the case where they have, like Danbury, multiple terms and delegating those terms to different departments, different commissions. So let's look at land uses requiring a special permit. This is an analysis that we did of the 18 municipalities in Western Connecticut. It took a lot of work to do it, but there are 1,327 distinct special permit uses in Western Connecticut in the 18 municipalities. And of course, the number of whether there are a lot or little will depend upon whether municipalities have all types of zoning, commercial, industrial, residential, and other uses. And those who don't have that, then it might be a little bit different. But special permits exist in virtually all zoning categories, not all, but in the case of residential, yes, churches, hospitals, schools, home occupations, kennels, multifamily, and accessory apartments are all examples of uses that are allowed by special exception. And we'll show you a complete list shortly here. And of course, in the zone of commercial development, fast food restaurants, gas stations, drive-in services, medical and dental offices, indoor theaters. This is just a handful of 1,327 different types we have. And you could argue that, well, why do you need special exceptions or special permits when everything is commercial? Well, obviously, they don't all have the same traffic impacts or maybe air quality impacts and a variety of other concerns. Noise could be another factor involved as well. So what we have here, of course, is the same scenario when it comes into industry. And that would be a case where you have light industry, heavy industry, and they aren't going to have all the same impacts. And therefore, it may be necessary to have special regulations for those groups. So let me just go on here. Here we have, let me just move this. I've got a little thing at the bottom here that seems to take up a little space, but as long as you can see, it's fine. You'll see in our region, with the exception of some places like Bridgewater that have only 8 special permits, mostly because it's a highly residential area. Our urban centers have an enormous number of special permits. So really what's happened is that we have an enormous use since 1959 of the special permit concept. It's really a use of zoning in a way that no one had anticipated prior to the 1959 era. And we even have at this point not only principal uses, but accessory uses and temporary uses that are being used by special permit. And of course, the question really is whether or not that level of specificity and detail is needed. And those are judgment calls every commission has to make on its own, because in some towns, what is called a special permit, and another town might be regulated simply as a site plan or simply as a zoning permit. And that really will depend upon the nature of the permit and the degree to which that particular use is compatible with the surrounding uses in which it's located. So what we've really discovered is an enormous number of applications for special permits. So even though there are 1,327 unique land uses, because there's multiple zones, we have about 381 zones in all of Western Connecticut. There's 2,115 actual principal uses, because it's not a question of this, they're all being unique. They are distributed across every zone or many zones with any given municipality. So this took a little bit of work to see what's going on, but you can see an enormous difference in the use of the special permit from our more rural communities, let's say Bridgewater and Sherman, to places like Norwalk and other urban centers. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tucker, who's going to go into some of the details on related matters, the site plan review versus special permit. So Tucker?
All right, so next we're going to talk about site plan review in the context of special permits. Site plan review procedures have a distinctly different purpose than special permit reviews, in that they're intended to confirm the conformity of the proposed use with regulations in a zone in which the use is already allowed. In contrast, a use requiring a special permit is not already determined by zoning to be compatible with the district, but it may be allowed in certain circumstances. A special permit functions in this way as sort of a mini zone change without a formal change of zone involved. Special permits require a public hearing and the adoption of very specific standards to make these uses compatible with the zone in which they're located. Also, unlike site plans, approved special permits must then be placed on the land records of the project. Next slide. So why are site plan review procedures relevant to the special permit process? Nearly all Connecticut municipalities and 16 of the 18 in the Western Connecticut region require site plan review as an integral part of the special permit review process. Site plan reviews address three distinct types of data that are relevant to the special permit process: the basic zoning requirements for the specific zone of concern. They identify the baseline conditions of the property and surrounding area, relevant both to the site development plan and to the special permit process. And they can also include a range of transportation, utility, erosion and sedimentation, stormwater, and watershed protection plans. These plans that are required for site plan review align well with the basic data mapping and planning requirements of special permit review. In terms of procedure, the requirement for a public hearing is the primary factor that distinguishes special permit review from site plan reviews. In addition, site plan reviews are not delegated to other commissions or boards, since their purpose is merely to ensure conformity to existing zoning standards, not to determine the potential compatibility of a use that's not normally allowed within a Euclidean zone. Because site development plans provide important information on the existing conditions at proposed sites, It is common practice to require site development plans to be submitted as part of the special permit review process. The legal notifications required also differ, with no required notice to applicant before a decision is made, although notice is generally recommended. In contrast, the special permit requires a notice in a newspaper of general circulation before the decision is made. So listed here are the top 10 site development plans that are required in Western Connecticut and which are typically found across the state. It's no coincidence that virtually all zoning regulations in Connecticut require some form of site plan review as part of the special permit review process. And these are just some of the most frequently used. So procedures and timetables. This flowchart here provides a simplified overview of considerations for the applicant on the left side and for the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff on the right side. The responsibility ultimately lies with the commission to ensure that the applicant has complied with all of the relevant requirements of the special permit shown on the left, and all the stipulations, conditions, and approvals or denials that are accomplished as required by statute and regulations. So the responsibility is on the commission to take care of both sides of this. Since special permits have conditions and mitigation rules that run with changes in the land, the commission can inspect and monitor special permit uses throughout the life of the project. So expanding this a little bit, this chart provides a combined timeline for actions affecting both the applicant and the commission. Following along on the left side here, we see that a public hearing must commence within 65 days after receipt of the application, request, or appeal, and shall be completed within 35 days after such hearing commences. The commission must then close the public hearing unless it receives the consent of the applicant to continue. Extensions may occur if the applicant submits revised plans or maps in response to public comments. Then additional time is needed for review. If the revisions are significant, this may trigger an entirely new application, which would then start the process over from the beginning. The decision on the application must be made within 65 days after completion of this hearing. So what conditions are placed on special permits? We reviewed the special permit evaluation criteria for every municipality in Connecticut to determine best practices and emerging trends. What we discovered is there is no standard approach for the special permit criteria used by commissions responsible for administering them. There are some commonalities, though, and here are the top 10 most common decision criteria used across the state. One is neighborhood compatibility, public utility capacity, suitable transportation conditions, suitable size and scale, emergency preparedness concerns with fire safety and access, adequate street capacity and access, appropriate landscaping and screening, consistency with the plan of conservation and development, consistency with the zoning regulations, as well as the suitability of the location itself. Nature-based solutions have become more prevalent since 1995, when the required plan of development was changed to the currently required plan of conservation and development. Numerous other statutory mandates or enabling legislation have expanded the range of factors that commissions use to evaluate applications requiring special permit proposals. These factors include erosion and sedimentation control, aquifer protection, surface and groundwater protection, wellhead protection, higher flood protection standards than those provided by FEMA's model floodplain regulations, and viewshed protections. However, planning and zoning commissions are not limited to those enabled by statute. There are a wide range of emerging environmental concerns, including reducing light pollution, protecting public water supply watersheds, riparian buffer setbacks, and protecting wildlife habitats that fall implicitly within the zoning commission's authority under performance standards considerations. So let's return to transportation and mobility issues, since we live in an automobile-centric society. One of the most obvious findings of our analysis is that there is no one consistent approach to managing these issues, including traffic, street capacity, and driveway curb cut concerns. Perhaps even more important is the virtual absence of decision criteria across Connecticut for the provision of pedestrian amenities and pedestrian access. If our goals are to reduce gasoline use and create walkable communities, then we'll need to expand the special permit review process to prioritize land use practices that balance the needs of all road users. Special permits are not simply about compatibility issues, though. One of the purposes of special permit reviews is to ensure the long-term viability of the proposed land use in the location selected by the applicant. The top concern across the state is whether use will adversely impact the property values of adjoining landowners. Another important concern is adapting existing structures for a new use that's compatible in the zone in which it's proposed. Finally, a handful of zoning regulations, 11 of them, consider whether the proposed use will serve the community's needs, as fitting as zoning is a tool to serve the community. Using science-based approaches to the evaluation of new development is a critical factor in developing zoning regulations that are resistant to litigation. As an example here, we're going to look at a policy from New Milford, Connecticut, in the Western Connecticut region. They've established a size and vehicle trip generation threshold as tools for triggering a special permit process. In essence, when the number of vehicle trips exceed the threshold, in the case of New Milford, 500 vehicle trips per day, as determined by the latest edition of the ITE Trip Generation Manual, a special permit's required. Building size is used here as a surrogate measure for vehicle trips, and also independently a factor that affects the size and scale of the building within a given zoning district. New Milford's regulation represents a best practice for distinguishing between uses that might be handled by site plan review, if buildings are smaller in scale, and larger buildings that would merit a special permit. Unlike a zoning permit, where the commission or their designated agent doesn't provide a reason for its approval or denial decision, in the case of special permits, the commission must explain their reasoning. Where no explicit decision is stated, the courts will go through the public hearing records to find a legal reason for the commission's decision. If the commission chooses to avoid placing these on the record, it opens itself up to the discretion of the court. Perhaps one of the most significant outcomes of the reason requirement is that zoning has increasingly evolved from a system of zoning districts into an era of more individualized land use regulation. So next, I'm going to turn it back over to Charlie to talk about special permits and non-conforming uses.
Okay, thanks, Tucker. And I'm going to speak about what's come out of Public Act 18132. The Connecticut zoning enabling statutes do not require a special permit for the continuance of a non-conforming use, which was decided by that Public Act 18132. Yet there is more to this story than that law anticipated. And we're going to go into that right now. So one of the nuances that we have to the nonconformity is when you have a substantially similar scenario, a proposal involves something which is just like, but not the same use as what was the nonconforming use. And so this now raises the issue of what do you do? Because that public act that was established is basically saying you cannot have a special permit for the continuation of a non-conforming use. But this is not a continuation of a non-conforming use. This is a situation where you have a non-conforming use which is similar to, or perhaps not similar to, and that becomes the question of whether it should be allowed, because it's not the continuation of that non-conforming use, but the continuation of a similar non-conforming use in that same building. So the question is, can this be done? And there is no case law that deals with the 6 municipalities that currently are doing this. And yet I believe what is being done is actually a very legitimate use of zoning. So let's take a look at what the 6 municipalities in Western Connecticut are doing. So we'll start with Brookfield here. And I'm going to read this just so you can get a flavor for it. So no non-conforming use of buildings, structures, or land shall hereinafter be changed into a new or different non-conforming use, except the commission by special permit may allow a change from one non-conforming use to another non-conforming use where A, those parts of an existing building site are manifestly designed or arranged for such new or different use. B, such new use is not precisely the same as old use, but the new use is generally similar to the old use, and I highlighted that. And C, where the transfer change does not involve replacing existing non-conforming structures with new non-conforming structures in whole or in part. And D, where the new or different use does not constitute the extension or expansion of an old use or part thereof on the same lot. So as you can see here, they've tried to lasso all of the possible issues that could happen when you change one non-conforming use to another in such a way that there is not going to be a violation of the non-conformity of the building, but the uses themselves are the issue at hand. So this is one approach that's been taken. Since this is not a question of case law, this is a question of best practice. Let's go to what New Canaan is doing. New Canaan takes almost the opposite approach insofar as there's not a lot of detail. The key term is objectionable character. No non-conforming use may be changed except to a conforming use or with the approval of a special permit by the commission to another non-conforming use of a less objectionable character. Of course, that raises the issue of what is objectionable. Truth in lending, truth in advertising, that could raise an issue in terms of how the commission or the developer may look at it. So that is like the broad brush approach. And let's look at number 3 here, New Milford's regulations. And they're using a multi-level review for a new use of an existing non-conforming use to ensure 1, the neighborhood compatibility, 2, ensuring orderly development, and 3, no greater impacts on the property than the previous use. I've highlighted some of the key terms here. So you see replacement use is consistent with the public health, safety, and general welfare. And then I highlighted with the character of the neighborhood. So these are different approaches to the same issue that we just seen from the previous 2 municipal strategies. And they also, what they do in this particular case, though, is they go into a lot more detail, as you can see, in terms of adjacent properties and zones, in terms of that character with the appropriate and orderly development in the neighborhood, adjacent properties and zones, and provided further that such replacement use creates no greater impact on the property, neighborhood, and adjacent properties and zones in terms of parking, volumes, types of traffic, property values, hours of operation, exterior appearance of the building, structure or lot, any other factors considered by the commission. So where previous one in New Canaan was just a one large word called objectionable, here we have some specificity, which in many ways has a virtue of giving the commission more leverage in making decisions. So what about Norwalk? Well, Norwalk is very similar in its test to that we just saw with New Milford, but has added a limit on the cost for the structural alterations. As you can see, number 2, further provided the cost of structural alterations to a building or structure changed to a new nonconforming use shall not exceed 25% of the assessed value of the existing building or structure. Now, you might argue that some of the previous examples I just showed would not even allow such a thing because this is allowing for an extension of a non-conforming use. And you might argue that that might be questionable. In any case, these are questions which each municipality will have to wrestle with in terms of how it flies in their community. So let's go to the one right here, which is really for Reading. And Reading has adopted a regulation similar to the one for Brookfield, focusing on the idea that the proposed non-conforming uses will not be more intensive than the existing use. And so, in fact, they almost are copycat in some of their language. And it's also B is more compatible with the neighborhood and zone. So you have different levels of specificity in order to deal with this. And of course, these are important concepts in a state that has had zoning since 1925. There's an enormous number of non-conforming buildings in Connecticut just because of the evolution of zoning over the literally 100 years, as of, by the way, only a month away, roughly a month and a half away, and it's the 100th anniversary of zoning in Connecticut. So let's go to the Westport. And Westport has a fourfold test, which addresses many of the same factors used in the other 5 municipalities. However, it also requires the following test. Those parts of an existing building site must be manifestly designed or arranged for such new or different use. This implies that the building is suitable for the proposed new use. So what you see here is a wide range of strategies on how to make a non-conforming use less non-conforming or as consistently non-conforming as the previous use was there. But the overall point of doing this is to understand is that the law that was passed, Public Act 18132, was only designed to say that you could not use the special permit to discontinue an existing non-conforming use. And it never dealt with the idea that a new use would be used in that non-conforming use. And so this represents where these municipalities have recognized the limits and weaknesses of the statute and dealing with nuances which were not anticipated by our legislators. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Tucker, who's going to go over a few remaining items on our agenda. Special
Thanks,
permits versus new zoning districts.
Right. So next, we're going to talk about when is it better to create a new zoning district instead of authorizing a special permit. So with the widespread use of special permits, there are often instances where the number of special permit applications is gradually changing the nature of the zone in which it's located. This can also happen when the scale or intensity of development of one proposal is too great to achieve compatibility with the zone in which it's proposed. 3 factors should be considered by a zoning commission when dealing with the proper approach to an overwhelming number of special permit applications or one that's too big to be addressed through that process. Scale and intensity are key factors, and consistency with the plan of conservation and development and the purposes of the zoning district are also critical. Probably the most important question to ask in this context is the proposed use consistent with the plan of conservation and development? The Connecticut Supreme Court has often looked to the POCD for justification that a special permit makes sense in a given zone. Next slide. So when's it better to use an overlay zone? Overlay zones are intended to address broad spatial concerns or to plan for widespread development concepts. Special permits are a one-off approach that shouldn't be relied on to address long-term planning for a district or town. Overlay zones are not limited to existing development, but focus on issues that cross district boundaries. Special permit proposals rarely involve interdistrict development proposals. So to close out here, to wrap it all up, we've established that special permits are intended for land uses that require special development standards and decision criteria to ensure compatibility with the existing zone. We've also established that there are no consistent standards or decision criteria across the state of Connecticut, although there are similarities between the tools that are most frequently used. The varied approaches to special permit uses reflect the varying densities of development across the state and varying levels of concern with what constitutes significant impacts. Special permit uses have the potential to impact transportation systems, utility capacities, and environmentally sensitive land uses. Special permit regulations allow for customized review of development not possible through traditional zoning permits or even through the use of more rigorous site development plan review processes alone. In Connecticut, special permit procedures exist in 166 of the 167 municipalities with zoning. Special permits are also used by some municipalities to control changes to non-conforming uses when such changes are of lesser impact than the previous non-conforming use. More importantly, zoning commissions are not authorized to discontinue an existing non-conforming use using a special permit process. It's important to note a special permit use in one town may be regulated by a site plan review in another town. This reflects the a la carte individualized approach to zoning that exists in Connecticut. For those of you interested in learning more about special permits and their legal requirements, the two best references are those prepared by Michael Ziska and Terry Tondro. There are several case law references that are important to understand, including the St. Joseph's High School versus Trumbull Planning and Zoning Commission decision. This training presentation represents the first statewide review of special permit best practices, and as such provides a planner's perspective on emerging trends and the range of approaches to the use of special permits. The ideas presented in this training session also underscore the importance of sharing best land use practices across the region and the state. And that's all we have for you all tonight. Thank you all for taking the time to show up here on a after work hours on a Monday night. We appreciate it. And the recording of this presentation will be available on our website along with all the others.
So do we have time for questions then, if there's any?
Yeah, we can certainly go through some Q&A.
Okay. I see that you want to handle that, Tucker? I think
Sure.
Margarita has her hand up.
First off, Gus is asking in the chat if anyone knows where he can get a copy of the Ziska book. Charlie?
That's the Ziska book. You can buy that online. If you go in and put a Google search for what's legally required, you can get that online, and I believe it's available from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Oh, I thought I tried and it was sold out, but I'll try. Maybe it was just sold out on Amazon and I didn't actually go to the state government to get it. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, that's what you have to do, because I bought one recently and I can tell you I got it from I believe it was from DEEP, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Got it. Okay, I'll try to get it from them.
Yeah, that's a very valuable book, especially on legal requirements for notices and timetables and all of that. That table.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I've flipped through our land use director's version. I just want to have my own copy. You know, put it right under the Bible on my nightstand.
Yep, that makes sense.
Under your pillow, better. Under your pillow, so that comes up through osmosis, and then you're smarter when you wake up in the morning.
That's it.
Yeah, Margarita's got a good point there. That subliminal education.
Margarita, you had a question as well?
Okay, this is really stupid, but I'm so confused. So the state statute in 2017 says that you can't eliminate nonconformities, right?
It was in 2018.
No, the 2017 one, the one that went into 8.2 and says that you gotta, Patrick, give me the wording, the one that we hate so much. I'm sorry. Patrick?
The specific wording, Margarita, I believe it says that you cannot, discontinue, lack of use doesn't automatically create discontinuance, right?
Of a nonconformity. Okay?
Oh, yes. Right. That's a separate law, but that is also an important one.
But that's what I'm asking you about. So where I'm massively confused is, so I have a nonconformity, and I'm not allowed to discontinue it because someone stopped having it. And now they come into me to start that one again or to do a slightly different use there, which is less deleterious is our wording, or something very similar to that. Why would anybody do a special permit for that? I mean, the 2017 law is pretty clear that you can't be taking away people's nonconformity. By the way, Patrick, you can't mute me, but if my question is really stupid, I just don't get why people would be even having this special permit for a new nonconformity in a place where there is a nonconformity already. Does my question make sense?
Yeah, well, the big issue is that you can have one nonconformity come in place of the existing nonconformity, which has a dramatically different traffic impact. And even though the building has not changed, the footprint has not changed, the setbacks have not changed, the actual uses that may occur there in terms of traffic could be substantially different. So that's, in my opinion, one of the main reasons where I can see why those 6 municipalities have tried the special permit. They don't have to use that special permit, but they've chosen to go that way. And it's not one of these cases where anyone has actually adjudicated what they're doing at this point, but that's what they're doing. You don't have to do what they're doing, but that's what they've chosen to do.
So since you've got one town with 2 people here, so to us, okay, you're going to have more traffic, then that use is more, what's the exact adjective we use? It's not deleterious, it's something else like that. Detrimental to the surrounding community or something.
Neighborhood. Not more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Yes.
Detrimental. So then you don't need to do a special permit. You just say you can't, we can't, by the 2017 statute, we can't eliminate a nonconformity. And B, as long as you say you can't put anything in that's more detrimental, then you don't need a special permit. So I'm just not following why you would do a special permit.
Well, and you've hit a very important point, Margarita, because what we are trying to present here is not that we agree with the 6 municipalities, but they've taken the position that they believe that unless there is a greater level of scrutiny, including, as you know, because it's a public hearing, the community's involvement, that in a way they don't want to be blamed. They want the community to actually sign off on it. If you want to read the underlying motive behind it, because you're right, you do not need to have a special permit to continue it. You could do it under a conditional zoning procedure.
Not even that. Somebody just comes in with a site plan and you say, this is not more detrimental than the existing use.
Yes, you could do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And the only reason we put this thing forward is because it's a very interesting approach that has been taken. And it's not that I agree with all of them. In fact, I disagree with a number of them as being very arbitrary and capricious. However, that can always happen. Arbitrary and capricious can happen even under a site plan or a zoning approval. But it's less likely under a zoning approval if you have specified, what the constraints are. It's a very unusual case, these 6 cases that have emerged here. And it's not that I think that they're the way to go. The ones that have been very specific, I think you could argue perhaps they're really concerned about traffic. And you really, as you know, the main difference is you get a public hearing out of it and you get to voice and air out issues that the community may have that you may not have thought of. Otherwise, you're right. You can just go with a site plan approach on this, or you could go with a zoning permit if you wanted to. Because basically any non-conforming use is allowed to continue as long as that owner has decided not to give up that nonconformity.
Okay. Charlie, just to this point, I think the issue is always going to be what the outgoing use is versus the incoming when they're not logically similar. So my best
Right.
example is you have a gas station in a residential area, so single family schools, allowed, whatever, but you're not, gas stations are not, but this has been here since the 40s, and now someone wants to put in a pepper factory, right? So the use changes, they're not similar, but how does one town, without having established criteria ahead of time, discern which one is, what the offsite impacts or the neighborhood impacts are on that? And I think that's where the special permit is necessary, because there needs to be some evaluation and some record keeping, I think, the town that says, listen, residents, or a judge or whatever, we looked at these things, and there's these factors and there's those factors, and one is greater than or less than the other, and therefore we rendered this decision. Because otherwise, we're going to be in this he said she said takings issue forever and ever and ever, because without standards in writing ahead of time, how do you create them and do that in a positive way, I guess.
I agree with you 100%, Pat. That's exactly why I think the 6 municipalities have taken that strategy, because it's really the difference between first impression and a more deliberate and thorough review. Because let's face it, if there's 1,327 unique special permits in Western Connecticut, is anyone going to write regulations that anticipates all 1,327? No, they're not. So to your point, that's the issue.
And just to add to it, I do think when nonconformities run their course, I think they do provide municipalities with opportunities to steer things towards the broader vision. You know what I mean? So, uh, in some ways, not having a regulation available to allow certain uses in there afford some flexibility that otherwise wouldn't exist, because I think it's a lot harder for municipalities to put every list that they want down in a zoning regulation and not look like they're giving away the farm kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think you've hit it. That's the real challenge we have here. I mean, when you look at across Connecticut, there's no single municipality in Connecticut that has anticipated every potential land use that could exist. And then, of course, in the context of nonconformities, the same issue emerges. Who's going to anticipate all the possible scenarios? And that's, I believe, why the 6 municipalities have done something in that arena anyway. It's really not all of the municipalities in Connecticut have actually looked at this issue, but I would say some of the most sophisticated commissions that we have in Connecticut, and I'm familiar with all of them at one level or another since I've been doing this for about 30, 40 years. Many of the most sophisticated ones are in Western Connecticut, who've had that. Well, first of all, the zoning regulations in the state of Connecticut were really born along the Gold Coast of Connecticut, from New Haven to Greenwich. That's where we had our first zoning. So we have a lot more experience in Western Connecticut with zoning than many of the municipalities in the Northeast and even the Northwest part of the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Overlay zones, it's an interesting thing. We got into that a little bit today, Patrick, when we were talking about, for example, we didn't actually talk about it, but I think you and I were thinking about it. Should educational uses just be an overlay zone? So wherever you're going to have a school, you just create an overlay zone so you can accommodate the learning facilities.
yeah, it's
Right.
interesting. Yeah, you're teeing up my question, actually, Margarita, for Tucker. Tucker, you had a slide about overlay versus special permit, and
Yeah.
I just had a comment or question about it. I don't know if you want to go back.
It was
Yeah,
very,
I think I can go back. Let's see if I can go back to the overlay zone, was it?
yeah, it was very, very perfectly timed because we were just talking about it this afternoon.
Yeah, I
Let's
mean,
see.
I think the problem with overlays is that they are, by by their existence, they are a rezoning application, right? So there is, in some ways, you know, the subjective approval of, is it consistent with your plan of development, and it's not, I don't know, I don't want to say as of right, but it's not as prescriptive as a special permit is. But like Margarita's alluded to, in Greenwich, things like non-for-profit private schools and churches and those type of uses, which are totally compatible with residential uses, have a special permit, right? And the reason I think we do it in Greenwich is we're just building the capacity for schools and those type of facilities to find a home and not sort of dictating it with a lot by lot overlay zoning thing. And I think it would be problematic in that case to just take the northern part of Greenwich and put it in an overlay zone. I think it's actually a better practice to use the special permit, but I'm just interested for someone to expand on that point.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Tucker.
I think the inherent flexibility of the overlay zone leads to it being used in a lot of sort of off-brand ways, so to speak. When it's sort
Yeah,
of like
you have to give me more. Sorry.
it's I think it's intended more for like a broader like spatially contiguous area where there's something specific you want to get
Like a
done.
village district. You're
Yeah, right,
like a
exactly.
village
Margarita's
district
got it. Like
area.
I think if you have a historic part of town and you broad stroke rezoned it or zoned it, years ago, but the context there of that zoning is not in doesn't comport with your overall zone, that's where you do the overlay because you could have smaller lots, less, setback, whatever, that kind of thing. But I think from a use standpoint, I think the special permit is really just a way to uh, create the capacity for those types of uses that you don't think are completely incompatible with the base zoning, but do need some examination. I mean, everyone knows what it's like when schools get out, right? It's so you need some analysis of the road network and the parking on site and whatnot, so you don't choke everybody in the neighborhood out. But it's not necessarily a problem from the use standpoint, right?
Yeah, I should mention too that we're going to be giving another presentation on special design districts, which will go into 4 or 5 different concepts: land development, special land developments, overlay zones, and floating zones, and how they're all applied. This presentation dovetails only slightly with the overlay zone, just in terms of the possible relationship to special permit, but we have another whole presentation on that issue. And another example of it, though, would be watershed protection zone, which is an overlay zone that follows the watershed line as opposed to district or property line approaches. And we've got 10 municipalities in Connecticut that use that approach. But it's not the only reason that overlay zones are used. It's also for design districts, village districts. And those are quite interesting that we're seeing some of those emerging. Design, environmental, those are 2 areas where overlay zones are emerging.
If the legislature doesn't kill the ability for us to do them.
Well, there's always that problem, which I'm not sure if they would do that. I haven't heard anything, Margarita, on that.
There is a bill out there, but we're figuring. I think it didn't move forward. The last time I looked, it was stuck.
Yeah.
But
I would hope so, because there's an enormous amount of the use of the overlay zone in Connecticut. That's a whole separate 1-hour training that we're going to give in the near future. But yeah, I mean, if they do that, there'll be an enormous number of planning and zoning commissions in Connecticut. They're going to have something to say about that.
Well, my biggest beef is the legislature, the people there need to understand that as of right is not a absence of permits, because that's what they seem to be indicating when they talk about those things. They they don't even know what they're saying.
Oh, is that what they think?
I've talked to
Oh,
a few
my
people
goodness.
in other places who misuse the word and think that it just means, I can go into town X and start building, 3 units or whatever and don't need to go through any process. And I'm like, that's not what that means. So, but okay.
Yeah, well, it always would help. Honestly, what we do need is a training session for our planning and development committee, and so that they're familiar with a lot of this. Actually, I gave a training session for all the legislators in Western Connecticut last year on zoning. But there's always turnover. There's new representatives, and it's a constant battle because who's on first today might not be tomorrow when it comes to our representatives. So it is a continuing challenge. I'll put it that way.
You got time for one more quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Gus, if you want to ask, the rest of you guys want to ask, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have a quick question, but
Okay,
it's probably more for
ahead.
it may have to be for follow up with Charles
Go ahead.
offline later. So there's in the West, and we have almost no commercial space, although we're working on that in the Village District. But we're thinking about changing our regs. We're beginning the process of amending our regs to potentially allow for more non-conforming expansions of residential homes. So this is in the residentially zoned portion of the town, which is 99% of the town. We have, like any town in Connecticut, we have a lot of non-conforming structures from pre-zoning. They're on smaller than we are 100% 2-acre zoning, so they're on less than 2 acres, or they're too close to the setbacks or in the setbacks, and we're looking. It was a long, it's sort of a multi-month project. We're working on trying to give relief to homeowners who want to build certain kinds of extensions and that aren't allowed in current rules. And special permits is, I think, the way that we're gonna go. So I'd love to have a conversation with somebody about residentials, but so it's about non-conforming structures, not about non-conforming uses. It's
Yeah.
about.
Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. Of course, that's one that you could do. Another is coming up with a flexible setback concept, which is not based upon specific setbacks for front, side, rear setbacks, but a one that looks at the overall footprint, and they would have to be something like an overlay zone where you say in this zone area or it could be on a case-by-case basis where you allow a certain amount of coverage for the site, which might alter what can be done and allow for development as long as they stay within, let's say, typically a typical lot, if you're just a minimum lot, is 48 to 50% of a lot is taken by front, side, and rear yards. That's what happens, whether you're a small lot or a large lot. It's about 48 to 50% of all lots are taken up by setbacks. But if you have flexible setbacks, which are basically going to be allowing for that same level of buildability, but allowing for flexibility on where those lot lines are, you have some more capabilities to do things that might not otherwise be possible. It's an innovative concept that I've been thinking about for several years. And it could work, but it really depends on the specifics of where this would all take place. And
Charles, can I follow up with you? Can I follow up with you offline? I'm not sure everybody wants to go down this rabbit hole with us, but I very much want to go down that rabbit hole with you. So
no, it's not a rabbit hole. None of this stuff is a rabbit hole. I was listening.
This is a zoning conversation. There are no rabbit holes. It is just a rabbit hole.
Yeah. No, we could follow up. We could chat afterwards and go into detail. It requires a lot of thought on this point that I'm raising. I can't give you a quick summary of it without going into a lot more detail about how such an approach.
And I'm happy to show you the work I've done. I've done case studies on everything that's come in front of our ZBA for the last 8 years or something, because we're trying to see what are people trying to do that they're getting rejected from, because our ZBA grants nothing. And our ZBA this is an issue where our ZBA wants more flexibility than it has. So I've done a case studies on that. I'm starting to work on other towns because I see different solutions, radically in different towns. But let me follow up with you offline later this week, Charles.
Okay, that sounds fine.
One more question?
Sure, go ahead.
On that slide with the modifications and consistency with McKinsey, I can't remember who did that. Which of you did that?
That was Charlie.
Yeah, I did.
That was one of the early ones.
The wording, the commission may modify blah, blah, blah. in
Mhm.
order to advance this other regulation that we have.
Right.
We cannot reduce our zoning standards and be consistent with Mackenzie. Was that your point?
Yes.
Okay, so if I have I don't know, no, an HO already gets it. So if I have something that is, Patrick, can you think of an example where our language allows you to modify it? He's gone. Okay, no.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was on mute. Uh, so we do allow greater height or different distances from things, but we have done our darndest to qualify why we would accept such amendments and not just say, hey, if you want to come in as a special permit, the commission can pick, any distance out of a hat and use that as the new setback.
There are a couple of places. I don't know, Weston, if you have this too. I don't think Tracy Kolakowski would have let you do. You knew Tracy, right?
A little bit. I'm a relatively new commissioner.
Okay.
But,
Okay. So we stole her from you.
Yeah.
And we love her.
We don't need to rub it in, Madam Chair, but
I'm sorry, but I hear you've got a great person. So
no, she's great. But we're operating, and Tracy, I think, had brought this in before my time. We're operating under our ZBA is operating under the strict case law on granting hardship exemptions.
Good for them.
And so what that's meant is since that lens came to ZBA 5 or more years ago, they've granted, I think, one or two exemptions in the entire time, and we actually have, I think, political will to actually make it easier for aging in place and for other purposes like that. We've had a lot of cases where we have, very sympathetic longtime residents who, need something that doesn't need or want, I guess is a better word, because according to state case law, they don't actually need it, they just want it. The ZBA wants to grant, but they don't have the flexibility to. So we're kind of working.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That is really a hard issue. So on this modification thing, though, it wouldn't be the ZBA that did it. In this case, it would be P&Z. And I think, Charlie, your point was you could increase the setbacks.
Yeah.
Can't decrease them.
Yeah.
You
can't reduce the setback. Basically, the Mackenzie decision, as it applies to special permits, is that you can be stricter but not less strict. So however you interpret that's basically what that decision has done. I mean, the primary focus of Mackenzie was to look at compatibility within a zone. All uses are treated the same in terms of uniformity rule, but because special permits are like a quasi zone of their own, the Supreme Court in Connecticut said they must be treated differently insofar as they can have more restrictive standards in order to make them compatible. That's basically it.
Okay, and so Patrick has his hand up, so I'll.
No, I think the alternative to doing that would be an overlay zone, right? I mean, that's to have a more to have a different treatment for the similar use. It would have to be consistent with the district, and the overlay would be the likely mechanism, right?
So
yes, absolutely. You just hit it exactly right, Patrick. That's exactly right. That's how you get around that issue.
Okay, that was I don't know about you guys, the rest of you, but I can think of where we have that in the regs where it says the commission may modify. Patrick, you probably can too. I don't know, Gus, if you do, or Sally. What town is Sally?
Sally is my chair, actually. So
okay. Sally's there. Hi, Sally.
Yeah. So yeah, no, we're, it's, we do have a fair number of special permits in town. They are mostly, historically and currently, we have some applications in front of us right now, but they're for non-conforming uses. They're for churches and clubs and things like that exist in the residential zone, and that we have we allow or in some cases allow them to add uses, make changes. We have a church in front of us right now looking to add a camp and things like that we grant special permits for. But we're considering creating a whole new, we're considering different paths to, for the problem we're looking to address is to grant a little bit more flexibility, either vested in planning and zoning, but more likely planning and zoning is going to vest it in ZBA, because our ZBA meetings in Weston are, usually they're canceled. They only have them a handful of times a year, and all they do is say no. There are even when they want to say yes. There certainly are some things that they've granted over the years. There have been some situations where there was a reduction in non-conforming use. Where we had a club that wanted more parking during the pandemic, and the land that they wanted to use for parking, for additional parking, was not, was inside a setback, wasn't appropriate for that, but it was currently occupied by a tennis court, which also was a prior non-conforming use of the space. And ZBA said, okay, and also the club was in violation of our parking regulations. They didn't have enough spaces. So the sort of whole explanation came around to ZBA was able to grant it on the basis of, you're reducing your nonconformity because you're reducing your underage of parking spaces, and you're taking, a tennis court that you weren't using, but which is in the setback, and you're converting it into parking. So there've been some things like that ZBA can grant, but for housing expansions, putting extensions on homes that are within their setbacks, and some other, it's usually 90+% of the time it's an issue of the structure being inside the setback already, and having a sympathetic reason for doing the expansion. We have situations where all the neighbors show up and say, yes, please give this to them, and ZBA says, sorry, no, you don't qualify for a hardship under state law, and we don't have any other authority to grant it.
Well, okay. I don't want to keep it too long here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's why I'm saying.
No, that's fine. It's actually excellent.
Charlie, can you try unmuting Sally? She's been trying to unmute.
Oh, let's see if we can unmute her.
Allow to speak or unmute. There she goes.
There I am.
Unmute now.
Thank you.
Sally,
Sally's going to correct. Sally's going to correct.
Sally, you might have something to say here.
No. Gus has presented our situation very well, and I think, as he said, we had not had political will to try to make some changes that we consider just properly corrective. And now we do. And so we're exploring alternatives to try to make it as easy for people to put things like a generator in the setback, or, just, these very minor things that a lot of times we just can't help them with, or the ZBA can't help them with because we haven't allowed them to. So that Gus has got this project that he's working on, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with some
we have a
bandwidth on it.
regulation. Patrick, close your ears. We have a regulation that I totally hate and that I've been trying to get rid of, but might work for you guys if that's what the problem is. It allows, in any zone, it allows a non-conforming lot to use the setbacks of the next zone down.
Well, that's a problem for us, though, because really, remember, all we have is R2.
But then you could put your generator wherever you want.
Okay, well, that's something to look into.
I mean, if they can't put the generator in, it's usually because of a setback issue, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Gus, you're muted.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, everything we're talking about, Margarita, is the setback issue. And as Sally said, we're not 100% residential, but it's over 98%. And all the issues we're talking about are in purely residential areas.
So, Charlie,
I think this is an interesting subject, though, Gus and Margarita. I look forward to talking to you further. No, I think it's honestly, because this whole issue of nonconformity is a big deal in Western Connecticut. We've dealt as I said, we've had 100 years of nonconformities, just going back on the history of zoning in our region. It is a big issue. So I think we should follow through on this. Whether you call me or I call you, yes, absolutely. I think it's a very important one, and that's why we put this into the special permit discussion today, because there's a lot of people who are thinking about it.
Yeah, super
Well, Charlie, I
interesting.
would just add that a variance does not it eliminates the nonconformity, right? You have now wavered the standards for the hardship, so therefore there is no nonconforming statute applied anymore. So in some cases, you may want to be granting a variance because the next person
Yeah.
who comes in, can't, just as of right, switch around and do things. They'd have to, they
Exactly.
Which
Exactly.
is why I don't like
Yeah.
this. I mean, why I struggle with this issue, but just was throwing the idea out because people here like it. It's worked for them.
Well, I think Greenwich, not to disagree with Margarita. I think what we've
Oh,
done in
feel
a
free.
number of instances over time is we've collected the frequent variance requests and put some carve outs to say, if you have this and this and this scenario, we would allow you to, you're in a different sort of overlay zone for compliance, and that way we're not burdening, or because granted, most variances never have to be granted, right? We all know that. So it keeps the wheels moving without having to burden the ZBA with making a lot of arbitrary decisions, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
We should
Well,
let you
okay.
guys eat dinner, right?
What's that?
We should
Well,
let
Sally
you.
and I have our own P&Z meeting in 7 minutes. So
Okay, so you're gonna jump out anyway.
Yeah, you're all warmed
Yes.
up, guys. Go get them.
You're
Yeah.
all
Okay.
warmed up.
Well, really good. I really appreciate everybody